Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is another video feed that I want to make about Islam. So if you've been watching some of my videos on my channel, you'll notice that I've been talking about various topics, and so to sort of help organize the videos, I will uh, label them according to topic, and I'll say from the start what the video is about. So now I'm going to be talking about Islam and why Islam is really the only global religion in the world. Okay? Sort of global organized religion in the world. Yeah, let's kind of make that sounds like a kind of a big claim to make, but I'll explain why. Okay? When we look at religions, world religions, there are kind of a few main, world religions that have kind of a majority of adherents, if you divide the population up between these world religions. So the majority of people in the world, of course, are, or I can't say are adhere to Christianity. What I can say is that they subscribe to Christianity. So the majority of people in the world would self-identify as Christians, and then after that there are people who self-identify as Muslims, Buddhists, and then of the Abrahamic religions, a very small percentage of the world population self-identify as Jews. So, and then of course there are many other religions, that do exist, that don't have that many adherents, or are more sort of more regional than anything else. But these are sort of global religions. There are Buddhists, for example, all over the world. You'll find Muslims all over the world, in most places in the world, Christians in most places of the world, and Jews, usually a minority in most places in the world, except obviously in Israel. So when we look at these numbers, why would I say that Islam is really the only global religion in the world? And the reason is because the big difference between people who subscribe to religions or self-identify as belonging to a religion and people who formally practice a religion, you know, is like basically night and day. So you get Christians, like a lot of my friends are Christian. I grew up in a largely Christian environment, and many Christians, though they may self-identify as Christian, are not sort of born again. You get the born again Christian, who's like the person that he reaches a point in his life where he gets baptized, or he is now needing to uphold certain Christian commandments, rules, laws, and so on. But for the majority of Christians, who self-identify as Christianity as Christians, they don't practice Christianity as such. Okay, and I'm pretty sure that most Christians would agree with me. There's nothing particularly they practice that originates in their religion as such. The thing about Muslim people, on the other hand, is that for the vast majority of Muslims, Islam is very central to their daily habits and the way they interact, with the world, basically, at various levels. Because in some regards, Islam is somewhat of a totalizing system, in a sense that Islam is often described as being a way of life. So it does not sort of confine itself to the four walls of the mosque. So you don't get a mosque Muslim, you know, like a person who just like lives his life and does whatever he wants to, and then he goes to mosque, for example, once a week on a Friday, to uphold the Sabbath of the Muslim, the Muslims. Um, it doesn't work that way in Islam, and it doesn't work that way for a lot of Muslim people. So most Muslims who self-identify as Muslims, which is 1.2 billion people in the world, have a deeper relationship with their religion than other people. Okay, do with their own respective religious traditions. So, for example, and this is where Islam differs a lot from other religious traditions, Muslims are required to pray 5 times a day. Now, granted, there are many Muslims who don't pray 5 times a day, but they do pray. Um, they do pray, if not all five daily prayers, but some of them, and if not daily, then at least weekly. And the way in which they pray requires very specific skills, because it's very ritualized and formalized, in the sense that Muslims have to learn to pray in Arabic, which means that all Muslims need to learn and memorize Arabic prayers from the Quran, which is written in Arabic. Um, Muslims have to learn rituals of purification, which involves their daily living. They also have a very specific diet that they need to follow. Um, they have specific dress codes. Even if many of them don't adhere to it, uh, they are aware of it. So religion sort of still largely informs Muslims. Islam largely informs Muslims about much of what they do, and it affects Muslims um, to to different degrees, but it does certainly affect all of them. So it depends on the extent to which people are religious. You know, it'll affect them, you know, more or affect them less. So, for example, you'll find Muslims who don't necessarily pray 5 times a day, but they will not eat pork and drink wine. So their decision not to eat pork and drink wine is rooted in their religion. You know, uh, you might find Muslims who otherwise don't adhere to much of religion, but they won't gamble, because gambling is against their religion. Um, so, at various intersections in Muslim life, you know, Islam has a great influence on the types of decisions they make. And because 1.2 billion subscribe to that tradition, which does aim to sort of affect every facet of life, you know, um, these people are affected invariably by the religious tradition they subscribe to. And so that's why Islam is really the only global religion, um, as such, that can be called one thing, basically, is what I'm saying. Because the thing is about Islam, and this is what people don't realize often, or sometimes I think it's what people fear about Islam, and that is that you can leave from uh, one corner of the world, let's say South Africa, and go to a mosque in China, not be able to speak Chinese, but go and eat at a Muslim person's table and feel confident that the food you're eating uh, is according to the Muslim dietary code. It's halal. You can go and stand in prayer in a mosque in China, and they will recite the same Quran that you have uh, learned in South Africa, and be able to conclude the exact same format of prayer um, that Muslims use right around the entire world, and read the same book that everyone is reading around the same world, around the world. You can go to Mecca and stand in the sacred mosque in Mecca, where people are from all around the world, uh, from different countries, different languages, different uh, ideological persuasions. Some of them are communist, some of them are capitalist, some of them are Marxist, some of them are whatever different ideologies, beliefs, political views, ethical systems, social hierarchies that they belong to. They all come together and they are able to pray together. So, this is a truly global religion, and really it is the only global religion. I mean, the only thing that maybe can be compared to it somewhat is Catholicism, and Catholicism is also very streamlined in that sense, because of course by a central authority, because it has a pope. Um, the amazing thing about Islam is that uh, we don't have a pope. Islam doesn't have a pope, and yet the religion looks pretty much the same. 95% of what we consider to be religion looks pretty much the same for all Muslims right around the world, regardless of political orientation, and even regardless of sect, regardless of whether the Muslim is Sunni or Shia, are the two main sects within Islam. The religion looks pretty much the same wherever you go, and so it really is uh, the only global religion in the world today. Currently, it's also the only religion that still holds to old school ideologies, still holds to old school practices and beliefs, in the sense that uh, modest dress for women was a strong notion throughout the world, throughout the Western world, throughout Christianity. Uh, Modest dress was one of the sort of normative rules within Western society. If you go back just 80 years prior to now, uh, women had to wear headscarves in the West, in Britain. So there's no sort of the problem we're having really with Islam is not actually a debate of one religion versus another religion. It's that Islam has by and large retained its Abrahamic traditions and customs, um, which were present in both Judaism and Christianity of old. But largely, what has uh, become, or what has been known as the Christian world, um, has evolved has evolved since. And so the conflict really, when people see a conflict in, or differences in people's ethics and traditions, and feel that Islam is incompatible with Western civilization, it is not Islam being incompatible with Christianity or Judaism. It's more Islam being different, and I won't say incompatible, I will say different to how Western society has evolved. Because Islamic society basically is just Western society, uh, uh, you know, uh, 60 or 80 years ago. The ethics and values are the same, and in a sense, Western society has evolved since, and Islamic society has not. And that's basically the difference. Islamic society has sort of been more adamant in holding to traditions, their traditions and their customs, which are rooted in the Abrahamic traditions and customs. And in many ways, the irony of it, though sometimes these two groups don't like each other much, but Jews and Muslims have a lot in common in terms of religion and religious tradition. Uh, and In fact, I think almost 70% of what they have by way of religion is common between the two groups. Um, that they should not like each other because of more recent political, uh, geopolitical kind of politics in the Middle East is really unfortunate, because there's never really been a relationship of hatred between Jews and Muslims historically, for the vast majority of history, of since the time um, Islam came into being. There's generally been a peaceful relationship between these two religious communities. So what I'm basically saying is that there there seems to be uh, a forced um, modernization agenda in the world that has sort of phased out Christianity. And I say phased out because there are very few places in the world where people still practice traditional Christianity and Christian norms and Christian laws. So, and as far as I know, it's mainly like uh, East Africa. We're talking about Eritrea, Ethiopia, and these places where you still have strong Eastern Christianity that subscribes to more authentically uh, Christian traditions, or Christian traditions closer to what Christianity might have looked like originally. Um, and Western Christianity is really just an extremely diluted, watered down version of Christianity, as far as I'm concerned, um, which we know because a lot of our own traditions as Muslim people are premised on uh, the idea that we are following the Abrahamic customs. And the Abrahamic customs are the customs of Jewish and Christian people historically, and are still the customs of Muslim people. So really what you have here is you have a group of religionists, uh, Abrahamic religions, Jews, Muslims, Christians, who all come from old world Abrahamic traditions, and Muslims are in a sense the last frontier for these Abrahamic customs and traditions. The last people of Abraham, basically, as a global religion in existence today, are actually Muslims. And so there there is that sort of aspect of the Muslim identity that has made them somewhat of a target for people who want to radically modernize and alter the way traditional societies work. And don't get me wrong, I mean, there is that agenda on the one hand, especially those who try to force that type of narrative. But there are also those people among Western scholars that are trying to reintroduce traditional Judeo-Christian values, the traditional uh, family structure with the man as the head of the household and as breadwinners, and women as homemakers, and these types of things. So we we are seeing people trying to revert back to the old Judeo-Christian sort of value system, but the West has gone so far in breaking down um, the old world that they have basically uh, ruined their own societies, in a sense that there is no longevity in the path that they have pursued. In many Western countries, they have a negative growth rate, population growth rate. The majority of people are old people, um, and they don't have heirs to hand over the legacy of the tradition or the legacy of them having built up the societies to this level. They don't have heirs to do so. And what's happening, and probably why there is this some disgruntledness from some parts of Western society, is that that legacy is being handed over to immigrants who come and settle in countries, come with robust Muslim Islamic traditions that are about family and building families and homes and communities, and they are having kids and they are having families, and they are becoming lawyers and doctors, politicians, occupying every sort of field and belonging to various hierarchies, thereby inheriting the Western legacy from Westerners who don't have kids who can take over the legacy from them. And then these Muslim families, obviously with their Muslim traditions and cultures, they have kids and they have people they can hand over this legacy to. And so they sort of become the new Western frontier, a Muslim Western frontier. And so it's it is now people who are averse to Islam, of course, right, would have a problem with that. Like, why are we handing over our country and the successes of our labor over to Muslim people, who are the other? Because you play into this narrative that there's us and them and the other. Well, who are you going to give the legacy to, basically? When you decided that to break up the traditional family structure in your own countries, you no longer had heirs. And that's why countries, many first world countries, welcome immigrants, because it helps the economy. And in so doing, they need to accommodate the fact that these immigrants will come with their own religions, their own cultural values, and therefore allow them to do so, to practice their own traditions, religions, and cultural values, because they are forming a very integral part of the labor of that country and helping stimulate the economy of that country. They are also basically taking the legacy forward that that country has developed up to this point. So kind of my message in this video is that Islam is really the only global religion, because Muslims still have a robust tradition that belongs to the old world, the Abrahamic tradition. It is not unlike the tradition of Christianity and Judaism, at least in its more or less original format. It is a tradition that Western society has largely departed from, and so there exists this fear that Muslims are going to take over. And what I'm basically saying is, fear not, because Islam really only represents what you once had. That's all. Thank you.